Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. The summer break is finally over. The Dutch Grand Prix is officially here. Max Verstappen will be hoping to win again, but not good news for Red Bull going into this weekend, confirming that they've taken so many poor steps with their car this season, they will have to mix and match upgrades, reverting several upgrades on their car for if they want any chance for especially Sergio Perez to have any handle on this year's RB20. This comes at the same time the rumours have emerged, certainly from the FIA, the governing body of the sport, that there's additional clause that was added that basically outlawed this inertial valve for the brake bias, the asymmetric brake bias, that potentially Red Bull were using so far this season was apparently nothing at all, just a random update they decided to make to prepare for 2026. Do people buy this potential explanation? What do you guys think is actually going on behind the scenes, especially because surely there needs to be some explanation for why Red Bull's advantage has absolutely disappeared over the last several rounds. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, a couple of driver market things. Alex Palou, of course IndyCar champion, was linked to Audi F1. He says it's fake news, nothing like that's happening. So, he wasn't exactly top of the list, but, well, at least as far as we understand, definitely an exciting driver, very good driver. I think he would do a killer job there, to be honest, but apparently that is not going to be happening. This is kind of interesting too. Of course, Audi themselves, Sauber, they are looking for a driver to, well, partner Nico Hülkenberg. I would give the seat to Bottas, personally. I'd keep him there. But, it's interesting that Robert Schwartzman, a driver that probably won't get his Formula 1 chance, unfortunately, but nonetheless a very promising driver in his junior career, just never really got the break that he needed. But he's going to run in Zandvoort in FP1 instead of Bottas. So, I don't know, maybe he's an outside contender to get that seat instead. Speaking of Audi, again, Jonathan Wheatley is joining as their team principal. There has been a lot of talk on the negative end for Red Bull that because Wheatley has extensive connections in Red Bull, he may be able to tempt many individuals who have worked with him for, what has it been, 18 years away to go to Audi as well. So this is the problem with teams that have periods of dominance. They often will run into brain drain eventually, and when you lose one or two key figures, all of a sudden you might lose 5 or 6. That's one of the other reasons why Wheatley leaving Red Bull could be a pretty significant L for the team in the medium term. We're going to talk about upgrades, certainly for the Red Bull in the coming minutes, but McLaren and certainly Mercedes and even Ferrari will be very confident because while Red Bull are seemingly taking parts off their car to try and find a better solution to where they currently are, McLaren, Mercedes especially, and possibly Ferrari, they are bringing further upgrades to try and make their car even better. And McLaren say, yeah, we've got our good aerodynamic testing advantage after, being further down in the championship, for example, than Red Bull. They've got new parts. They're going to look to take advantage of it. And look, Zach Brown also says they've got the advantage in the constructors because they've got both drivers at the front, which is true, and it's always great having both great drivers. Of course, it's always an advantage until it's no longer an advantage when they start to clash. So, and I feel like that might only be a matter of time, and we've seen maybe some glimpses of that this season. Speaking on Ferrari, they have a major upgrade package in the works soon. We're not sure if it arrives yet or the weekend after, really, just because Giuliano Kessler says here from Formula Uno, and he says, in their opinion, so as far as they've heard, it'll be Monza onwards they bring their upgrade. But the point is to change the airflow at the rear suspension and diffuser to allow the car to be more stable because they've got to fix the bouncing of their car. They added performance with their upgrades in, Barcelona, for example, but they added bouncing, and that was a problem. So according to what Formula Uno have heard, the next corrections, the next major upgrade is actually going to be Monza, not Zandvoort, I guess we'll see. And after that, when we go to Singapore, and then certainly like Baku and stuff like this, that's when they've got a new floor on the way. So, Ferrari are trying their hearts out to catch up to where they were at the start of the season, but it's obviously not been ideal for them. And it is very interesting what we'll discuss over the coming minutes here again on the Red Bull piece, just because Ferrari at the start of the season were the closest competitor to Red Bull. McLaren's upgrades that they brought to Miami, it gains them a couple of tenths on Ferrari, but it seemed to gain them, half a second, 0.6 of a second on the Red Bull, despite the fact that McLaren at the time said that it was a relatively minor upgrade, and even to Ferrari, that upgrade for McLaren only gained them a couple of tenths. So the fact that Red Bull were, actually where McLaren were from that race and beyond shows that Red Bull took a nosedive, and we'll get into that in a second. Now, Sergio Perez, he has a different race engineer this weekend. Hugh Bird is actually stepping aside for paternity leave, and his performance engineer Richard Cook, I think it's Richard Wood. Am I tripping right now, or am I missing something here? Because I thought there's a guy called Richard Wood, because why would Richard Cook be known as Woody? You know what I mean? I'm pretty sure it's Richard Wood, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. But anyway, that's what's going on here. And as we see, Hugh, my race engineer, is expecting a baby very soon, so he'll be spending some time at home, and I wish him and the family best of luck, etc., etc. Congratulations to them. That means that Woody will be stepping up to the plate. So, yeah, maybe not ideal, probably not the end of the world, but not maybe ideal preparation for Sergio Perez. But this has been the big talking point of the last couple of weeks. Article 11, 11.1.2, this was the line which, still as far as my layman brain reads it, says that you can't asymmetrically brake. Like, it seems to be quite clearly outlawed that the forces applied to the pads are the same magnitude. But they added a few weeks ago now this pink section to clarify the situation. And when we first saw this, the question was, okay, why are they clarifying this? Are they clarifying it because someone has asked and they've said, hey, could you potentially misread this? And the FIA said, well, possibly, so let's just make sure it's absolutely watertight and change it. Or has somebody come to them and said, hey, this team is actually doing this and you want to have a look at it, and whether that team was Red Bull, that of course is speculation. Or have they just randomly decided to wake up one day and decide, you know what, I want to add a few more words into that 11.1.2 part, with not much else was added at the same time to the rule book here, certainly not from actual rule related stuff. They added some stuff about, you know, safety cars and some other features of the book at the time, but you know, nothing quite to this extent. So that was my question on, is it mere coincidence they added this, or whether there was actually something to it. And then over the coming days, we then got this article from Racing News 365, which says quite explicitly, and it's still up here for you guys to check out, links in the description as always, from Racing News 365 sources, it appears the RB20 up until the Chinese Grand Prix mounted an inertial valve on the braking system section at the rear downstream of the brake-by-wire system. In practice, the valve with a T connection received a single hydraulic pressure to basically asymmetrically brake. And then of course the big follow-up drama was then when Peter Windsor commented on this and said that it's possible that they had to remove this, effectively what has now been declared an illegal element, before Miami, and that kind of explains the grief they've had since then. And then Craig Scarborough kind of goes on to describe exactly what this would look like, why this would be very difficult to discover. But of course, what many people want to know is, like, is that, first of all, did this actually happen? Is this real? Is this not just speculation? But also, secondly, what could be done about it, right? Because if it's true that somebody said, hey, we think Red Bull are doing this, or even somebody internally at Red Bull, of course, we talked about the whole Jos Verstappen sabotage theory, which has kind of been going around, which wouldn't really make much sense to me. But whatever, people are talking about exactly how it was known that they were doing this, given it's hidden deep within the, you know, the guts of the car, as it were. But if it is true, the question is then, well, you know, how is it allowed, and why isn't there going to be any potential repercussions for it? And or are they just going to deny that it ever existed in the first place, which they may well do, because Motorsport Today, they come out with an article where they say that an FIA spokesperson spoke to them and said there is no truth that any team was using such a system, which is relatively explicit. Of course, you can still look into the exact wording here and you know, debate exactly what it means, but I think it's pretty clear cut. The FIA is saying that there's no truth to the matter that any team was using a system kind of like what we saw described. So that's what the governing bodies say. Now, people of course are going to debate this and wonder whether this is actually the reality or not, because, you know, they weren't using such a system is what they say. Does it, you know, mean that any team was experimenting with it, or, you know, talked about it? I don't know, but, you know, this quite clearly says Red Bull or no other team was using this, and that's what the official governing body are saying in the sport. So on some level, you've got to kind of take their word for it. And ever since we've talked about this brake bias stuff for the last couple of weeks, I've never been sure that Red Bull are doing this. It's all been speculation. I made that very clear. But it's just, this explanation fits many of the items that we've observed in reality over the last couple of years. The absurdly good tyre degradation, the massive advantage in race pace compared to qualifying pace, the seeming unbelievable stability through the corners, the lack of any understeer at all. So, you know, there's a few features that make you think, okay, this would be a plausible explanation for why that was seemingly the case for the Red Bull car, and why it had such a massive performance lead, and Max was lapping a second lap quicker than anybody else back in China, and then very quickly that's no longer the case at all. Verstappen's complaining about the balance of the car. It's just like, there's too many things to me for this just to be a coincidence. That is still my overarching opinion, although I don't know the reality of the situation here. And of course, some people are going to look at this and say, oh, well, here they go again, the governing body, covering up for Red Bull doing this. Because, look, if the governing body said, to be fair, like if you look at it from the other perspective, if the governing body came out and said, yeah, a team was using this system, that's why we implemented this rule, then of course it goes on to say, well, all right, who were that team first up? And then what should the punishment be for doing this, if anything at all? And people would argue maybe there should be one. So why do they add this? If no team was using it, then why do they add it? Their explanation was they were simply clarifying the regulations going into 2026 just to make sure that it was all watertight and everything like that. But to me, this is pretty watertight enough. I don't know. Do you guys buy it? Do you guys not buy it? Tweet your thoughts in the comments below. The thing is, I'm not even sure Red Bull buy it on some level, just because Helmut Marko has made many comments over the last couple of weeks as to the nature of their car compared to how it used to be. Because as Marko says here, at the start of the season we had a car that was as balanced as the McLaren is now. It could handle all tracks and all conditions. Then we took a wrong turn somewhere. The car has become a bitch that only Max can tame. So, pretty straightforward as always there from Helmut Marko. But so explain to me how this is possible real quick. That Red Bull have had a dominant machine for the last couple of years. They unveil the RB20 this year, which seems a lot more extreme in various ways. Yes, there were parts of the car that we believe Adrian Newey wasn't especially happy with, but the car itself was unbelievable at the start of the season. It was as balanced as ever, and it looked like the RB19 on steroids. That's just what it looked like. So how have they gone from that car at the start of the season to where they are now, when, Marco's calling it, is not a particularly nice word to describe the performance and the nature of the car. So Red Bull are now saying, oh, well, we might have hit our performance ceiling. We can't maybe go any further than this. This is the best we've got. And, they can tweak away and they can make a few changes here or there. But then they go on to say that at least on Perez's car, they're going to start giving him some older components, because the older components seems to potentially be easier to handle. They might be slower, certainly in the hands of Max, but they might make the car a bit more stable and better to drive. But the explanation from, let's say, Perez going from 18-18, 10-18, 21-18, and then immediately ran about Miami and obviously Imola, going to 4-0-0, 4-7-0, 6-7, like in terms of points scored. And Max is obviously an outlier because he's Max, but looking at it from the Perez point of view, my opinion is there's got to be an explanation for this outside of just the idea that the other teams got better. Because the other teams got better, for sure, but Red Bull definitely regressed, and the argument is whether they regressed because of upgrades that actually failed, or whether they regressed because something on their car that was making it rather good was actually removed. Because, they obviously put upgrades on their car in, I think it was Hungary they had some, but also in Imola they had some other ones. But it was Miami that they looked more flawed. Obviously Max still goes on to win in Imola, but Perez was kind of nowhere. And then the weekends before at, the Miami Grand Prix that Norris eventually won, the Red Bull was apparently the same in Miami, and that was the race they talked about the curbs and everything. And sure, the curbs have occasionally caused problems for Red Bull, but nothing massively extreme. Miami seemed to be a surprise change, and then it's all been downhill from there, right? But like Marco basically says, their car at the start of the season was fantastic, and it was in Bahrain, in Jeddah, so much faster than everybody else. If they went back to that exact car, they'd probably still have the fastest car. Maybe McLaren would be nearly there, but there's no doubt in my mind that if the Red Bull was the same as it was at the start of the season, things would look different. So then the argument is, well, why don't they just go back to that spec, right? They're talking about changing the parts on Perez's car. Why not on Max's as well? If the car was better at the start of the season, why not just go back to that? I mean, that would be logical. I guess they want to understand their development process and, understand where they might have gone wrong to fix it going forwards. But now they're saying, no, we've hit our ceiling. We can't get much better than this anyway. So that's one side. The explanation would be that they cannot go back to the car they had at the start of the season because they were using something that wasn't necessarily real. So, this is all speculation as always, but I think that it's all rather interesting. And, look, Red Bull are not going to say anything about this, but what they are going to say is that they're enjoying the flat-out battle amongst the top four teams, apparently, and that, they're going to try and get the best out of Sergio Perez. They are admitting, though, their car is not as good as they thought it was, and you can debate the reasons behind that, but potentially, and recognizing that changes are necessary to certainly Perez's car if they want any chance of getting him more comfortable in the machine, because if they can't, then his season is going to keep going from arguably bad to worse. Just before we close out the video, I thought this was kind of cool. We talked the other day about this comment from Kyle Larson. Incredibly talented driver. Like, I think the other day I probably downplayed his talents on some level. Like, Larson is definitely a very talented all-round driver. Now, what would it be like if he was up against Max in various series? I'd like to see a challenge, you know, just to see a race in like 5-6 different series, who comes out on top. It would be very interesting to see. So, you know, Larson obviously deserves his credit, but Max is Max, and he is, you know, 4-time world champion to be in a couple of months' time on the bounce. So he was asked the question, Max, who's the best driver in the world? And a very interesting and mature answer here from Max. We know he deals well with the media, certainly nowadays, and I'm sure on his lips was like, I'm the best driver, what are you talking about? And everyone who's a top driver who you ask this to, they'll say the same thing. But like, Max gives a nice cordial response and says, hey, everyone's good in their own right. The debate of this guy's better than that one, who cares? Everyone is good in their own right, he says. But you know, I don't know if he necessarily fully believes that, because, you know, to be a top driver, you've got to believe that you're probably better than anybody else who's on the track. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.